Next, let's look at an interesting chart. Here's the overall market trend. In Cyprus, you saw the structure of the market, in which price ranges, how many listings there are, and what the demand is. So what does all this lead to? What's really happening in the Cyprus property market? Notice that only Larnaca and only Nicosia are growing. I'll tell you a bit later why that's the case. Look at Larnaca, it's growing faster than any other city in terms of transaction volume. So these are actual sales there. You see 2,100, already 2,500 in 3 years. And there's a similar picture, a similar trend with Nicosia. I can tell you right away why this is happening. It's because prices in Nicosia and Larnaca are the lowest in Cyprus, just as in Limassol, they're the highest. So that's the reason for the prices and the volume, which is why growth is happening there. In the other regions, Famagusta, Limassol, Paphos, the situation remains unchanged. If we compare the regions, we've calculated the same coefficients for each region. Notice that the lowest tension, or I would say the most balanced market, is in Nicosia. You can see the ratio of what's being sold to what's being bought, what's being sold. Right now, there are 4,500 apartments there in total of various types for sale. 3,240 have been bought, so the ratio is 1:39. The most difficult situation is in Limassol. Here, of course, the coefficient is crazy. Yes, 5.5. This is the largest excess of what's being offered for sale over what's actually sold. That's why you need to be careful when investing in Limassol. Naturally, this affects prices. How does it affect prices? The general approach to determining whether prices are rising or falling, as I mentioned. It's clear from these ratios. But I think most of our listeners are interested in regular standard apartments that are for sale in the range of 200, 300, 400,000. That's why here I've presented a chart showing how prices have changed over the past year. Well, almost a year. The data was collected as of August 1st, and now it's practically the end of June, so it's almost a full year ago. And so we selected data for October, January, as of January 1st, and then the beginning of June. And here we can see that in almost every location across the market, prices for typical residential apartment units have now begun to experience a steady and gradual increase in value. They have started to rise gradually in all regions, in all major cities of Cyprus. Although at the beginning of last year, they were falling. Mostly they were falling. You see, here is the line, here is the line. In the same Paphos, everywhere they were gradually declining. And somewhere around here, since the autumn of last year, they started to rise almost everywhere. But as I said, yes, you have to look at all of this in context. It depends on the market segment, because you won't see the same picture everywhere. Again, I want to point this out right away, although we'll look at more charts later, that the situation is completely different for apartments above 400,000, above 1,000,000. Their popularity is not just declining. I showed you this chart earlier that their popularity is falling overall in Cyprus, but also in terms of prices. If you want to buy an apartment above 400,000, you can easily demand a 20 to 25% price reduction, or even more, because those apartments are definitely selling much worse. The situation is actually much worse when we look specifically at luxury properties, as you can clearly see in the data, and as I have previously demonstrated, and will certainly show you once again. Just take a look right here at these figures. Back in the year 2020, the total number of 6,125 units began to significantly decline, which essentially means that the overall market share and other related metrics decreased quite substantially over that period of time. That is, this is expensive high-end real estate. Lately, it has been selling worse and worse, so you can negotiate the price down there. But here, I'm afraid, in the 200 to 400 range, the price had dropped. But about a year ago, it started to gradually rise. It varies. The more expensive it is, the later the prices started to go up. The cheaper properties have started to rise gradually by 1 to 2%, as you saw. I just showed you 3% at most, but they have started to go up. So now, Now, as for specific markets, let's quickly go over what we see in specific markets. Well, here's Nicosia. I want to quickly go through and show what's here and how things are. Here, take note, in Nicosia, the prices are low. That is the majority, 2/3 of the apartments are sold for less than 200,000. That's by quantity. In terms of volume, yes, of course, half of the money goes to such apartments. So the market there is like that. Everything is cheaper. Furthermore, the supply there is also more or less stable. Here, please pay attention. These are the properties for sale on the market. There too, more than half of the apartments, these blue and red ones, are properties up to 300,000 on the market. So there, as you can see now, for example, Limassol, and you'll be shocked. That's why I say Nicosia is more or less okay. There are also quite a lot of properties with such reasonable prices, up to 300,000. And generally speaking, that's what's being sold there as well. The main bulk is 200 to 300. You see, the blue bars represent properties priced up to 300,000 euros. The red segment represents properties up to 200,000 euros. The dark red indicates the resale market. And just as a reminder, this is the new build market. These are properties sold by developers. That's the picture for Nicosia. Looking at 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments, we see the usual pattern with a slight increase. In general, you can see what the prices are like. Prices for 3 bedrooms are quite reasonable. Average prices are 250 to 135 for 1 bedrooms. So the prices are quite democratic. So next we have Larnaca. Larnaca is very similar to Nicosia. Only there, the share of elite properties is even much smaller than in Nicosia. The share, just take a look. But otherwise, there's really nothing more to say here. That is, it really reflects, it's very similar to Nicosia. And you can see the growth is very rapid, very fast. Larnaca in general, actually, we consulted artificial intelligence on various indicators. Artificial intelligence called Larnaca, a star. According to AI, Larnaca is the most promising market in Cyprus. Next. Well, the same thing, the offerings are quite balanced and the price is fairly reasonable. That is, it seems to be just a bit higher than in Nicosia. Even so, however, the prices are remarkably affordable and fair. Next, Raffles. Now in Paphos, the situation is, as you can see, a bit different. There's a lot of resale property here. It's immediately different from Larnaca, meaning there's much less new construction here. And in general, I want to say, I admit, I don't know, I haven't been able to solve this mystery, why. But in Paphos, in fact, the largest number of houses are sold. In general, the most houses are sold specifically in Paphos. Everyone thinks it's in Limassol, but no, most of the houses that are actually sold and offered for sale are often in Paphos. Sometimes it's even more than in Limassol, even though Paphos is 5 times smaller as a city. So there, in fact, about half of absolutely everything that is sold on the market are actually residential houses. So the share of apartments there isn't 70 or 80%, like in Nicosia, for example. The share of apartments there is much lower. It's about 40 to 50% of all housing. And there's a lot of resale properties. That's in terms of volume. And notice here as well, the share of cheap properties is smaller. It's not like in Larnaca or in Nicosia. Here, the segment is really small, up to 200,000. So in Paphos, there's a skew regarding apartments. Now, prices are higher than in Larnaca or Nicosia, noticeably higher. Here, it's not 250, obviously not 270 like in Larnaca, for example. Here, it's higher. Moving on. Let's move to Famagusta. Well, Famagusta is a small market, so I'll just show you. There's really not much to comment on here. Tourists have started buying less, so there's less construction here. The market is basically stagnant. It's at a standstill. Well, there are still some relatively cheap options available. And now, moving forward to the next part. Limassol came back to life a little. In 2022, as you can see, there was a sharp jump, obviously because of the war. A lot of people arrived. And that's it. When a lot of people arrived, after that, the Bank of Cyprus cooled down the market. The situation with loans became much worse in 2023. In the fall of 2023, as we can see, 2023 was already stagnant. All of this would have affected Limassol. A lot came onto the market, and now Limassol is stagnant, more or less, but pay attention to the share we see in Larnaca or Nicosia. Yes, what share? Here are the red and blue ones, so it's noticeably lower. But notice that in Limassol, the share is growing. How about those in the 200, 300,000 and 300 to 400,000 range? Pay attention whether it's the mass segment or not. The 200 to 400,000 range is where the share of sales is really growing. And the luxury segment, 400,000 and above, has become smaller, and gradually we see much less selling in this sector. Here, it's already almost 1.5 times less. And up to 200,000, well, it's still holding on somehow. But above all, it's only this sector that's growing, the 200 to 400,000 range. So that's in terms of volume, in terms of money. Now the supply. Take a look at what a complete imbalance there is in Limassol. Well, if anyone is interested in the details, this is, of course, the fault of the Cyprus government. I believe that they allowed such a wild, senseless imbalance in Limassol. They could have avoided this. Look here, the red ones, there are very few of them. We haven't seen anything like this with you, neither in Larnaca nor in... Let's check a couple of graphs. And what kind of supply? A huge supply of elite units above 400,000, a very small supply under 400,000. And then people wonder why prices are so high in Limassol. Because the market is currently failing to reach a state of natural equilibrium. And this is primarily because the market is being artificially manipulated by external forces. So here are these demand and supply ratio coefficients. Here too, we present them for different area groups in Limassol itself. Because there is another important point here. I wanted to note that in Limassol is not only very unbalanced compared to other regions, but even within Limassol itself, the situation is also a bit wild. Just look at this crazy number. So here is the supply beyond the highway, right beyond the highway in Limassol. On average, the supply is 18 times higher than what was purchased last year. The best, most balanced situation is in the west. In the west, this refers to the areas from Ipsanas to Eremi in the region. Well, tourist area and the old town are in roughly the same situation. But also pay attention to where people want to buy, what people want to buy. Here is a wildly low number, a low ratio. Right now, 0.13. You see, there are no other numbers like this here. This is one of those cases. There are only 42 apartments for sale as of the beginning of June. And last year, 326 were purchased. Well, obviously, but 0.3 in our case, 42 divided by 326 is 13%. A big increase. A big increase of market prices was in this particular segment. Well, the overall trend for consistently low and competitive pricing in this specific segment is still very much ongoing. It simply continues to persist today. In this segment, you can certainly lower the asking price as much as you want. Yes, as you can see, from 300,000 to 400,000, there are already 14 sellers listed here, which means there are 14 apartments for every one buyer. So you can definitely do that. So as an addition to Limassol, I also wanted to show you a couple of charts that, so look, here are the prices in Limassol. Limassol is very uneven. across its different areas geographically, the lowest ones. Here in the West, you see the average price for two-bedroom apartments. We took two-bedroom apartments, standard ones, yes, without any extras, not penthouses, not on the seafront, just regular two-bedroom apartments. Here, the average price is 251,000 apartments from Ipsonas to Erimi. And at the same time, you see 421,000 is being offered for sale. This is in the central tourist area that is Neapolis together with Germasogeia, with all the other areas in between. Here, each one is marked red, and take a look. This kind of breakdown is just by color, simply how we separate them. The West is yellow, yes, here it is. The central tourist district is clearly highlighted in a green color. This serves as a visual guide to demonstrate exactly where and which specific locations we are currently counting. So basically, I have now thoroughly discussed the most significant aspects of what I originally intended to share regarding the current state of the market. And to wrap everything up, I would like to summarize the key takeaways and final conclusions. And if you happen to have any specific questions at all, I would be more than happy to provide much more comprehensive and detailed explanations for you, maybe on something that interests you. If we speak in broad strokes, the market in Cyprus is more or less, well, first of all, let's put it this way. It's a growing market. Nicosia and Larnaca, for instance. I consider Larnaca especially promising, and it's growing the fastest. And I can share my personal opinion. In the long term, probably the most promising area is somewhere up there in the northern part of Larnaca, Livadia. Pay attention to it because prices in Larnaca are still low there, but the spots along the sea are good, and overall, prices are rising, but for now, they're still low. Now, regarding demand in general, the demand, of course, is mainly for apartments priced at 200, well, up to 400,000. There is a lack of offering under 200,000, so the number of transactions is lower simply because there isn't enough supply. Although generally speaking, up to 400,000. Therefore, such apartments, about 80% of them, are sold in a certain area in Larnaca, so they are the leaders. In all other regions, there is a certain stagnation. And finally, probably the last thing I wanted to mention is about luxury apartments, expensive apartments. You know, just recently, I saw a video about Turkey. Authors of the video went to the sellers of these high-end luxury apartments complex with roughly 100 apartments. Developers told them that only 5 apartments are still free for sale. Then authors went to the local land registry equivalent and found out the opposite picture. Only 4 or 5 apartments were sold in the whole complex. Authors even checked the lights in the windows during the night to confirm it. Now, I might be mixing up the numbers a tiny bit, but the situation is completely different. Even though the developers say that everything is sold, that the whole complex is almost sold. So don't really trust the situation with luxury apartments either, or with more expensive apartments in general. Let's say for $500,000, the situation isn't very good, so you can confidently negotiate the price down here. And as for regarding the lower price segment of the market, I personally think that in some specific places, there will be a moderate level of price growth. And in some other places, it might even be quite noticeable, depending entirely on the specific area. Well, I guess that is pretty much everything I wanted to tell you for today. Now let's move to the questions.